Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on Steve Wozniak. As many of you already know, Steve Wozniak was the brains behind early Apple, especially the Apple I and Apple II. If it wasn't for the Woz, there really would be no Apple computers today, and I think that's pretty safe to say. Since I couldn't find anything better to organize this video on the Woz, I decided to throw together an iceberg chart about him. Much of the information on the Woz can be found in his autobiography, iWoz. This was a very good book, and I encourage you all to check it out once this video is over. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our generous channel members whose names are on screen right now. For those who are not familiar with an iceberg chart, the topics on the top are the most well-known and common, and the deeper you go, the less generally known they are. I didn't scientifically rank any of these entries, and a lot of it has to do with how often it's brought up in the book, my general knowledge beforehand, and where it's located inside the book. With all that said, let's dive right into the video. Co-founded Apple. In 1976, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs co-founded Apple Computers in Jobs' parents' garage in Palo Alto, California. Wozniak was the engineer behind all the early products, mostly the Apple I and Apple II. Woz was also working for Hewlett-Packard at the time, working on calculators. The Woz. The Woz is the nickname given to Steve Wozniak. Woz is clearly the first syllable of his last name. The nickname is also endorsed by Wozniak, with many of the things he's produced having the name Woz in it, such as Woz.org and his book, iWoz. Prankster. Wozniak is a known prankster. He's committed many pranks throughout his life and considers it very fun. These are not mean pranks, but harmless and funny pranks. Apple I. The Apple I was the first computer from Apple Computers. Wozniak showed it off at the Homebrew Club, which will be talked about later in the iceberg. This was sold as just a board, and you had to make your own case and supply your own monitor. This is often called the very first personal computer. Engineer. Woz is an engineer by profession. He really likes to use as few chips as possible, and he had been engineering devices from a very young age. Honesty and ethics. Woz has stated many times that he considers honesty and ethics a big part of his life. He believes the worst thing you can do is lie, and doesn't believe in harming anybody for whatever reason. Started personal computer revolution. Woz can be credited with starting the idea of the personal computer. From a young age, he dreamed of having a computer that a single person could own and fit inside a house. Woz worked hard and his dream did come true. The Apple I and Apple II are partly responsible for the personal computer revolution, alongside Commodore and Tandy. Scott the Woz. Scott the Woz is an American YouTuber focusing on video games. He started his channel in 2017 and has grown a lot since then. I remember watching Scott the Woz way back in the day when I was younger, and he was very enjoyable to watch. The one thing I never understood was the blue border in all of his videos, but it's kind of part of the whole channel now, I feel. There is no known relation between Steve Wozniak and Scott Wozniak. Robbed at gunpoint with Jobs in a parking lot. When both Steves were in college, they are making and selling blue boxes, a telephone phreaking device, both of which will be covered later in this section. They met these guys in a pizza parlor who wanted to buy the blue box, but they didn't have the money. While both Jobs were out in the parking lot about to start their car, one of the men came out with a firearm and demanded the blue box. There were a few phone calls back and forth, but Jobs never explained how to use the blue box. After this incident, they stopped selling blue boxes. Prank called the Vatican. Woz was feeling funny one night and decided to use his blue box to start making international prank phone calls. He used his blue box to call the Vatican and acted like he was Henry Kissinger asking for the Pope. The Pope was asleep at the time, and they put on a bishop who told Woz that he had spoken to Kissinger an hour ago. The Blue Box. The Blue Box was a telephone phreaking device used in the 1970s and 80s. This device would trick the telephone system into making free calls. They did this by playing a certain tone that the telephone company would hear. One of these tones would let anybody make long-distance calls for free. They did this by dialing a 1-800 number, which is a toll-free line, then playing a 2600 Hz tone, which would hang up on that line, essentially leaving it open. After this, you would type in the phone number you were trying to reach. Telephone phreaking. Telephone phreaking was a common practice among computer hobbyist circles in the 70s and 80s. A lot of the stuff here was finding workarounds in the Bell telephone systems, such as getting free long-distance phone calls. Worked at HP. The job that Woz had before Apple was an engineer at Hewlett-Packard. He worked on calculators here, and he greatly enjoyed working at HP. This was his dream job, and he enjoyed it a lot. He left after the Apple II days at Apple. HP had no interest in making a personal computer, and once they did, they left Woz out of the project. Woz's father. Steve Wozniak's father, Jerry Wozniak, was a bit of a celebrity in the Cupertino and surrounding areas. He played football at Caltech and was regarded as a very good football player. He was also an engineer at Lockheed Martin. Refuses to vote. Steve Wozniak refuses to vote in elections. He figures that no matter who wins, his life will be generally unaffected. He came to this conclusion after the Pentagon Papers were released, and it revealed how even the president was subject to the pressures of the military-industrial complex. Polish. Steve Wozniak is ethnically Polish. He doesn't make this a huge part of his identity, but it has influenced him with his dial-a-joke telephone line. More on that later. iWoz. iWoz is Steve Wozniak's autobiography. This was co-authored by Gina Smith, who is a journalist in California. Dancing with the Stars. Steve Wozniak appeared on an episode of Dancing with the Stars. He's also appeared in other television shows like The Big Bang Theory, playing himself. Gifted an award by the Polish American Congress. Woz was gifted an award by the Polish American Congress for his achievements. He was given the Heritage Award. Funny enough, the same organization sent lawyers after Woz for his dial-a-joke telephone line several years prior. Has his own $2 bills. Steve Wozniak has a printer that prints off his own $2 bills, and they're completely legal tender. He uses these and sells them. Now, that's what Woz says. In reality, from what I've gathered, he buys the sheets from the mint and sends them off to be perforated so he can tear them off and use them. Plane crash. In 1981, Steve Wozniak was flying his Beechcraft Bonanza aircraft with, at the time, his fiancée and a few others. The plane stalled and they crashed. Everyone did survive, however, but Woz was not able to form new memories for several months after the event. This is called anterograde amnesia. Planned to leave college for a single year, but he came back 10 years later. Wozniak took a temporary leave from university while Apple was getting off the ground. After the plane crash and leaving Apple, he returned under a pseudonym being Rocky Raccoon Clark. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from UC Berkeley in 1986. USFest. USFest was a huge musical festival ran by Woz in the early 1980s. Woz originally wanted this to be a country concert, but the managers he hired wanted it to be a pop concert instead. There were two USFests. This event had many different artists and was the prototype for other multi-band festivals like Lollapalooza. Previous wives. Woz has had a few wives over the years. These include Alice Robertson, Candace Clark, Suzanne Mulgren, and Janet Hill. Janet Hill is his current wife as of July 2025. Dial-a-joke. The dial-a-joke was a telephone line Woz ran in the early 1970s. This was the only dial-a-joke in the Bay Area. People would call, and they would hear an ethnic joke that Woz would say in an Eastern European accent. These jokes were typically directed at the Polish. As we said earlier, the Polish American Congress actually had sent lawyers after Woz because they did not agree with what he was saying on this telephone line. 888-888-8888. This was Woz's phone number for a brief period of time. While having a string of 8s as a phone number sounds great on paper, in practice it was not. He would often get calls at all hours of the day from children pressing 8 over and over again on the telephone. This is one of those things that it seems cool to have, but once you actually have it, it's a complete disaster. Homebrew Club. The Homebrew Club was a computer hobbyist club prevalent in the early days of Silicon Valley. Some of the big names in early computing who went to these meetings were, of course, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, Bob Marsh, Adam Osborne, and Paul Terrell. The TV Transmitter. The TV transmitter was a little prank device that Woz made when he was in college. This was a TV jammer that he would use to play pranks on other students. He would jam TV signals and then make people believe that hitting the TV or standing in weird positions would fix the TV signal. He was almost caught doing this in class once. A fraction of the class was in a lab, and the other students were in a hall watching the lab on a TV. Woz used his jammer, and the teaching assistants at the back of the class knew right away what was up, and told the class, whoever's using a jammer, shut it off now. Woz did not want to get caught, so he waited for someone to use the bathroom and slowly turned the dial down, thus framing someone else for his crime. Captain Crunch, John Draper. Captain Crunch was an early telephone freak who was very popular in the early days in the Cupertino area. His real name is John Draper, and he ran a radio station out of a van so the FCC could not triangulate his position. Woz and Jobs did meet Captain Crunch once, and Woz described him as being kind of weird. In iWoz, Woz believed that he was going to be meeting a rebel type character, someone who was evading the law and cheating the telephone system. Homestead High Prank. When Jobs was still in high school, Woz and Alan Baum made this banner to drape over the high school during graduation. They called this the Brazilian Best Wishes banner. This banner had a huge middle finger on it and said Best Wishes down the sides. It was signed Swab Jobs, SW being Steve Woz, AB being Alan Baum, and Jobs being Steve Jobs. This plan was foiled, however, since Jobs started to tell everyone at school. Nixon Prank. When Woz was 12, his mother got into Republican politics and took Woz to a Nixon rally. He was able to tell Nixon that everyone in his ham radio operators club in the 6th grade was all huge fans of Nixon, and a local paper also ran with the story. The truth is, there was no club, and Woz was probably the only 12-year-old in the state who knew how to operate a ham radio. So yes, he did fool Nixon. Almost caught telephone phreaking. Jobs and Woz were both almost caught while telephone phreaking. They went up to a payphone with a blue box and kept trying to get long-distance calls. The operator knew, however, what was going on and kept cutting the line. They also alerted the police to the payphone. Jobs and Woz were both caught with a potentially illegal item on their hand. So they did what the most natural thing to do is, and they lied to the police, saying it was a musical synthesizer. This isn't exactly wrong since the box did make tones, and they were let off the hook for that. They actually told the police it was an early Moog synthesizer. Ran up thousands of dollars in printing fees from a prank gone wrong. Woz once ran this prank on the printers in his college. The prank was he would send commands to the printer to print exponentially large numbers. This soon started to have several page-long prints, and it actually ran the budget of the program of his school into the gutter. Personally, I think this prank is useless. I'm not sure who you're really pranking here besides the school. The 6800 and the 6502. The 6800 was the processor Woz was looking at for the Apple I. This was very expensive and would have been very expensive for the Apple I. Luckily, MOS Technologies released the 6502 and was very similar to the 6800 for just a fraction of the cost. Paul Terrell $25,000 deal for the Apple I. One of the first major deals Apple had was with Paul Terrell at the Byte Shop. Terrell wanted 50 fully assembled Apple I boards for $500 each, totaling at $25,000. The order from the Byte Shop is often considered where Apple truly started as a company. Ham radio. Steve Wozniak is a big fan of ham radio, even learning how to use it and operate one at a very young age. For those wondering what ham radio is, it's like an extremely powerful walkie-talkie or personal radio network. It is regulated by the FCC, and you have to pass a test to become a licensed user. A Russian girlfriend. At one point, Woz was seeing a girl in the Soviet Union named Masha. She was an interpreter. She also knew a lot of KGB people and would often let Woz know when the KGB was following him. Breakout. Steve Wozniak also created Breakout in the mid-1970s. The idea was from Nolan Bushnell and Steve Bristol, who wanted to make a single-player Pong game. Jobs was already working at Atari for part-time and was asked to make the game. He had gotten Wozniak to do it and told him that they'd split the payment 50-50. Woz got $350 and Jobs got $5,000. Yeah, so Jobs wasn't exactly super honest with Woz in this case. Agreed to leave Apple for HP. Woz planned to leave Apple in favor of HP before Apple really took off. Since his dream was still working at HP, leaving Apple was a foreseeable option for him. Once he did put in his notice, Jobs called Woz's whole family to call him and convince him otherwise. Fake Zaltair ad prank. He also pranked processor technology. Pretty much, Woz ran this prank where he distributed leaflets for this fake computer called the Zaltair. This computer claimed to have garlic-covered keyboards and invisible ink screens and a ton of other wild claims to make this computer sound funny and clearly fake. Nobody knew who did this prank till years later, and some people blamed other companies like Processor Technology. Soviet apartment bugging. When Woz was in the Soviet Union, he was in an apartment with his friends, and this Russian music started playing in the room. There was no visible way to disable it. Woz's friend took the ceiling tiles and ripped out the wires for the speaker. Then he said that the Soviets could not listen to them anymore. Another one of his friends had heard this story before he went to the Soviet Union and looked around his room and found a brass plate under a rug. He unscrewed this and the chandelier fell out of the ceiling onto the floor below. Movie theater. Woz owned a movie theater in San Jose at one point. His ex-wife Alice's friend Sherry wanted him to buy it. Woz also became a Freemason when trying to save his marriage with Alice. Soon, he also bought this movie theater, but she still left him. Woz said it was in a lower income part of town, so the crowds here were not the most friendly. Movies like The Warriors, which is an amazing film, perform really well here. Universal Remote. Woz was the creator of the Universal Remote. He was tired of having so many remotes for all his different entertainment systems, so he and a group of people designed a remote that would play back other infrared signals. Woz described this function like macros in Microsoft Word. The Woz Plan. The Woz Plan was a plan Woz had to sell 2,000 shares of stock to other employees who really deserved it for the low price of $5. A lot of the people who bought these shares were able to live very comfortably. Woz was also able to buy a house with the money raised from this. I think this is a really good thing to do, and it shows the character of Woz, putting others before himself. Well, that wraps up this video. I think once I finish a few more Steve Jobs books, I'll take a crack at my own Steve Jobs Iceberg. I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, then go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. And if you really like the channel and would like to help out monetarily, then please consider becoming a member. I typically upload these videos a little bit earlier than scheduled, so you'll have access to those as well as a few other things, like the shout out at the beginning of the episode. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.